This evening's Dharma talk I've titled, what did I title it?
Abandoning feelings.
Yes. I actually remembered it. I just wanted to see if he did. He has it written on his hand. Abandoning feelings. So that's not a recommendation. What it is, it's a description of what we do, what you do, what I do. That's how I know about it. When you have an emotion, any kind of what's been called by my first teacher, my root guru, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, would refer to emotions, feelings as high-speed thoughts. I don't know if I would agree with that or not, but if that helps you, you can use it. So the emotions arise, intense feelings arise, and rather than just feeling, we start to avoid the feeling in a very subtle kind of way by describing or talking to ourselves about why it's happening, or talking to ourselves about who caused it, or talking to ourselves by saying, why am I feeling this way? Why is this? What is this happening? What is going on here? What's going on is you're feeling. And that even the word feeling leaves what is actually happening slightly. There's a slight discontinuous situation happening where you're just slightly backing away from what is commonly called the present moment. You're kind of having a little tiny mini escape. Doesn't make that sound. But I made that sound. And that's actually abandoning something. Anytime you add anything to anything, anytime you add anything up, this is a form, can be, maybe not in every situation, but is a form of materialism. And in the case of the spiritual path, it is spiritual materialism. Trying to get what? Someplace else. Have you noticed that? We don't really like where we're at quite often. We wake up in the morning, we don't like it. We get ready to go to bed at night, I don't like it. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. Something's wrong with us. And if we get tired of that, we start blaming our partner, our mate, our mom, our dad, our brother, sister, neighbors. So what's being emphasized is here, and what is being recommended is that you, if you're a meditator, and if you're interested in strengthening your awareness around why you function in a certain way or why you keep maybe running into obstacles, maybe a good idea to actually look at what you're actually experiencing right when you experience it, rather than you experience it and you abandon it. You experience it and you opt for something else about it. The extreme of that would be writing a book about your feelings. Maybe even writing in your diary might be a kind of buffer to get away from it, or change them into something else, or magnify them, or decrease them. Any kind of strategy around the feeling seems to be a way of getting away from the very thing that we need to be looking at. Not because that particular feeling is so important. It's just that the habit pattern or the habit or energy that is established by moving away into why is this happening? It's because of this. This is happening because of that. It gives us the illusion of getting somewhere, the illusion of making some kind of progress. So what I'm saying by using this title, Abandoning Feelings, was that the title? Abandoning feelings is not so much an accusation necessarily, but it's just I would like you to just observe your own feelings, your own awareness, either on the cushion, you're sitting, holding still, you're having emotions arise and fall. That's actually an area where you can exercise just being aware of it. You're not going to push it down. You're not going to fluff it up with excuses or explanations. And you're not going to block it off or distract yourself into a game of pool, something else. Nothing wrong with pool. There's nothing wrong with anything you might go to in itself, but it seems to be, it provides a kind of a habit pattern that we start to get a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction to it. So this happens and we immediately avoid it. This happens, we immediately shut down. And it seems that you can actually get away from or reduce the impact of difficult emotions if you immediately call your friends and this is what I'm going through. What are you going through? Well, how are you feeling? And other people will help us do that. If you're sitting, you're just sitting and maybe you're not feeling really great, but you're working with it. And then your mom, your dad, your partner, your brother, your sister, maybe even your dog, if you have a talking dog, might say, how are you feeling? Or what are you thinking about? And you say, because you want to be honest, I'm thinking about killing you. No, you wouldn't say that. No, but you might say something like, I'm having a lot of difficulty with my feelings. I'm going through some difficult stuff. In a way that is a kind of a way of abandoning the feeling. But on the other hand, you're with someone who's close to you, a relative or a friend or someone, and you don't want to abandon them, so you've got a little bit of a problem there, you could say. But you could also just be genuine and say what is happening to you and give the person that you're responding to the opportunity to be intelligent and realize that it's just being straightforward. It's not that they're not causing it. And possibly, if they are triggering something in you, you could even say that. The other thing you could do is not say anything, and still not really be abandoning them. I'm always open to questions if you're not sure of what I'm talking about. I'd just as soon have it be a mutual thing rather than I give a lecture and you all listen and we go home. Yes.
Is it important to understand what we're feeling?
No. Because the understanding takes the form of concepts, ideas, stories, circularity that just keeps the whole thing going. It might shut down the prickliness of it for a while, but we haven't we haven't actually allowed ourselves to totally feel it, so it keeps knocking at the door and knocking at the door. And it'll keep changing into something else, waiting to be included in your life. So I say, don't miss your life. Actually, whatever is happening to you, if you're sitting on the cushion or if you're sitting at your kitchen table and out of nowhere, which is everyone has had something like this happen, we just say, and I sometimes call it an emotional tsunami, starts to generate from somewhere, comes out of nowhere, just kind of broadsides us, and we suddenly go into kind of a slump. Just relate to that. Don't make up, stuff. Don't make up stuff about it to cover for what it is so that it somehow makes some kind of sense. Trying to make sense about anything is, that can be a cover-up. Maybe not all the time. More?
It seems like sometimes when triggered,
Yeah.
it can feel like it softens the situation if we're able to explain what's going on to whoever it is.
Yes.
Who's in front of us. So when there's some kind of demand for an explanation, or maybe that demand is even coming from yourself,
Yes.
what can
Well, rather than have some kind of protocol that I can tell you what to do, I would say bring as much awareness to it as you can before you jump the gun and jump into some kind of a response. You could actually, it depends on who it is. It depends on what your relationship is with them up to this point. If you're talking about your husband, then you already know what that relationship is, and you're in a position to actually say, just let me work with this for a while. And you're also in a position to say, I'm just feeling sad, or I'm feeling unhappy, or I'm feeling, put it more generically, I'm feeling a lot of negativity. And wait for them to ask, is it something I've done? So that you can respond to that, rather than tell them ahead of time. Wait for them to ask about it. Have an actual conversation with them. But always have it where you're including what they're asking about, rather than you're worried they're going to be thinking certain things. Don't think what people are thinking about what you're thinking about what they're thinking. Because it's just like scrambled eggs. It's, you can't find the yolk anywhere. Yes. Oh, you had a question? You did? Oh. Yeah. So if that was clever, that's about you. It's not necessarily about me. Well, I'm not actually clever. Yes.
Sanho down in Austin, Texas.
I know him really well.
Asks 2 questions. When is a feeling worth sharing? When is it better to stay quiet?
And again, I really feel that that's really, there's no protocol for that, that you actually have to look at that situation. But if it depends on who it is, what your feeling history is with that person, what your relationship is, if it's your spouse, or if it's somebody, a really close friend, it might be different with each person. So that's why it's important to actually relate to that person where they're at. And in order to do that, you have to know where you're at in that situation. So there might be times, it's probably Sanho, this probably isn't going to be all that helpful. But you might do it one way, you might do it the other way. You might, at one point, you might really share, and the other time you might not at all. There doesn't seem to be any protocol for that. But when one gets tied up in being right or wrong, if you're concerned about being correct or incorrect, it's just a trap, because it's always dependently arisen. So therefore, right and wrong is just a lower level of vibration as far as being a living being. I'm not saying that some people don't do horrible things that you could say, well, that's wrong, or really great things that are wonderful to say that's really good. I'm not saying that doesn't arise, but to do that ahead of time, to actually allow yourself to feel the texture of the situation, the emotions, the thoughts, and so on, whatever is happening, before you jump into some kind of right or wrong mentality. How do I look in there? Okay. Am I really tiny? Mm-hmm. About the size of a mouse. Yeah. Huh? A baby mouse, yes. Let's talk about that. Yeah. So Sanho, I would say that if you're in the situation and that's something that is coming up, like a should I or shouldn't I? Should I share or shouldn't I? I can help you this much in this way. If you're questioning it, probably not. If there's a question, should I or shouldn't I? Just stay back a quarter of an inch and wait for the situation to change in such a way that now it's time to share, or now it's time to not share, so that it becomes more obvious. If you're asking yourself, should I or shouldn't I? This is always kind of suspicious, because if you're working with ego and you're trying to understand your self-centeredness, your narcissism, your self-centeredness, and your self-deception, you're not going to be able to see the self-deception. Quite often our friends, our mates, our relatives can see our self-deception because they They get the vantage point of being over here. And they watch you go through this and that and that. And they can kind of see the way you plug up your own ears. Don't listen to what you're saying. Or cover your eyes. Don't see what they're seeing. Or stir up your thoughts in such a way that you can't, through some kind of elaboration on everything. Elaborations on something, that's what the whole idea of abandoning feelings. Something happens, let's say, here's, if I hold my hand up and wiggle it like this, there's the feeling. And what we do is, rather than actually witness that, see that, feel that, hear that, we want something else. Because that isn't fulfilling, or doesn't tell us anything, or doesn't have the message we're looking for, or it doesn't have the message that we're worried was going to happen. So we cover it with what? Elaboration. Well, it must be happening because of this, because I haven't drank enough water this week. Or constant speculation about the nature of who we are, what we're doing, what has value, what doesn't have value. So it seems to be important to, yes, Shoka.
Do the questions, should I or shouldn't I, disappear when something is choiceless?
Say more.
It seems like sometimes if I am involved in an action, that the question, should I or shouldn't I, is still arising as I'm doing the action. So I'm not clear if that's choiceless.
I'm not clear about the question. Can you paraphrase it again? Simplify.
Do the questions, should I or shouldn't I, continue to arise when something is choiceless?
Yes, more than likely. If something continues to arise and you're noticing that it's continuing to arise and you're using that as some kind of an excuse to make a decision, an arbitrary decision, because you can't stand to be in no man's land, no woman's land, no them's land, no person's land. Sometimes we don't like being on the razor's edge. We want to do something, even if it's wrong. We want to do something. We'd rather have at least we know. This is the propaganda of ego, self-centeredness. And it's very subtle, and people don't discuss this very much. It's very subtle, and it only starts to show its outline with lots of sitting meditation. If you can discuss this intellectually and with someone, and you depending on the strength of someone's intellect, someone is really a lot more adept at handling concepts. They can talk you right out of whatever you're thinking about or talking about. They can win, so to speak. And you can do that with your own discursive thought as it's arising. You can make an arbitrary decision based on some kind of pseudo-logic. Is that helpful? So I would just say, hold out. Hold your seat. What's the name for that? Oh, patience. Yeah, that's right. Wait. Just wait. Sit and wait. And as you're waiting, don't necessarily turning it into, I'm just waiting for something, like you and I talked about earlier. If that happens, then don't abandon that either. But if you're in a situation where you're feeling anxious about it, then and you can't particularly take a position of, well, I'm just going to wait, like waiting for a bus, or you could do that. But you could also, as you're waiting, whether it's in the doctor's office or in your relationship situation or for something else that you seem to be on the razor's edge about, you could just watch what's happening in your body. Nothing stays still. Everything is changing and moving into something else. Anything you look at is, if you watch it without adding, without subtracting, and without shutting down, and this is where I'm talking about feelings especially. If you just look at it, you don't do anything with it, don't take credit for it, don't take the blame, and don't turn away as if it's meaningless, it will change. because nothing lasts and everything is constantly in flux. Everything that looks like something is in flux until it doesn't look like something. So you could wait. You have a lot of time. You're a young guy.
William Murray from Grand Rapids wants to let you know that you fill his whole screen.
Because of my head? Fathead? I'm a fathead? So he's calling me a fathead?
I think he's saying he has it on full screen.
He has it on full screen. Oh, I see. He's referring to the mouse picture. Yeah. Really big mouse. Yes.
And Brandon from Buffalo has a question.
Brandon.
He asks, is your 90-10 rule applicable in all situations?
Well, I think that would be up to you. It's just the 90-10 rule that Brandon is speaking about is, when I say especially relationship dynamics, is to listen, receive 90% of the time, and give out or give away or talk 10% of the time. It's just if you do that, you'll notice that any relationship dynamic tends to get a little bit healthier. It might not totally solve the whole thing, but just to receive what somebody's talking about and hear them. I'm not talking about doing it with some kind of resentment, but actually hear. You might say, how do you mean? And the person gives a person a chance to paraphrase themselves. Quite often, someone paraphrasing themselves, we tend to kind of think or reflect when we talk. So sometimes if we're asked to maybe repeat that, or can you say that a different way, or can you say more about that, it gives a person a chance to really drop down. They realize, oh, I actually have somebody who's going to listen to me. And that's something that happens in a fraction of a second. There's someone that is receiving. That's a big deal in this world. It's a big deal in relationships, especially if you're really sincere about it. You really care about the person you're talking to, no matter who it is. So I would say that it may vary. I would say if you started with that, then depending on the person and on the relationship and on a lot of things, it might just go to 50-50. Or you might not be able to see. It might just be fluctuating all the time. It's the attitude of 90-10 rather than actually doing it. But you may have to do that for a while in order for that understanding to sink down. So you can see that you really have to be, in our tradition we say, put other people before yourself. That's hard. It's like, well, what about me? Don't I? Of course, we have to be compassionate, care about ourselves. But you can't do that if you're avoiding your own feelings. The feelings that come up need to be included by not being objected to, agreed with, or ignored. Don't push it, don't pull it, don't shut down. And this way you actually train your mind to work with that in such a way that you begin to make friends with yourself and you stop objecting to your negative feelings. You know, you can have, if you start to open to this over a period of time, eventually all kinds of feelings will start arising. They don't belong to anybody. You have feelings that don't really belong to anyone. But don't believe what I say. Don't believe anything I say. Brittany.
How can we practice taking responsibility for the emotions that arise?
Just like I just explained it. Just don't push on it. By doing anything with it, you're avoiding responsibility. Wouldn't you say? I mean, if you follow me. But if you just feel it and don't point the finger at anybody, don't point the finger at yourself, don't do anything with it, then it finds its own stratum. It finds its own level of, you would maybe call it importance, or it finds its own natural hierarchy in all the other things that are happening in your life. Instead of, sometimes we'll see someone have an intense experience and suddenly that becomes their whole life. They don't even know that they forgot to put their shoes on in the morning. They run outdoors with a red sock and a blue sock. I guess that's okay these days. But people ignore because ignoring isn't something you kind of deliberately ignore, although sometimes maybe. But by avoiding anything that arises, we tend to create some kind of a, shutting off our intelligence, our insight, because we're maybe afraid of what we're going to find. And what we are going to find, if we do enough of this, there's no self. There is no solid being here. There's a body here. There's all the sense organs, and there's breathing. There's, defecating. There's eating. All those things are happening that are constantly saying, yes, you're somebody. You're a real person, and you were born in 1993 or whatever. Whenever you're born, and you're, and you have a name, and you have a dog, and the dog has a name. And, we populate our mind with all of these things that are all happening, and yet who you actually are is free of all of that. So we gather all of those lumps of experience around us. Question?
When someone shares their feeling or
Yes.
with us, what do we do with them?
Listen.
Do we react or
Don't do anything.
just aware?
Yeah, don't do anything. And now, if you hear something and somebody's saying what a terrible thing has happened, you feel emotional around that, or you resonate with that feeling, then you would just resonate. Sometimes you probably all have noticed, sometimes if somebody tells you something that's happened to them that's really terrible or tragic or emotional, sometimes we start to tear up ourselves because we can see how terrible that is or how difficult that was. Same thing if somebody tells you something really funny. You may start to chuckle. So yes, less is better, I think. Just don't do anything unless you have to. So if you do that, then you're actually taking a position of just being, insofar as it is a position, of just being present. And then whatever happens, you'll relate to it in a, you'll either move towards it a little bit or move back a little ways, or you move sideways. You'll kind of dance with that situation. If everything else is moving, you're probably not going to be staying totally still. Yes?
Seems like if we're able to do that, to just receive what someone is feeling, there's more space, and that can feel awkward. How can we relate to that?
Oh, awkward is good. I like awkward. If I can do it, you guys can. Awkward is good. Awkward is a sign that you're to use that in a general way, not always, but it's a sign that you're actually putting yourself in a situation where you're receiving things without having them necessarily fit your requirements for the ideal thing. So you're actually willing to be in that situation. You have a specific thing you're talking about?
Seems to come up a lot.
And I would say that's a good, insofar as their signs mean anything at all, it's good to have some awkwardness happen. Have a little bit of embarrassment happening.
How can I not shut down on that?
Very good question. The way you can not shut down on it is, the way you have to begin that is to see the way you've shut down without trying not to shut down. Don't try not to shut down. Don't try to not be awkward. Don't try to, you can go on and on and on. When I say it's a waste of time, well, maybe not, but it's very circular. Once you get into that orbit, you start to go around and around. It's like any habit. Once you begin to do something habitually, it starts to show up, like coffee every morning. I'm still working on that, getting enough. So you would just watch that, just observe, and it's much easier, you could say, much more clear if you have a strong meditation practice. The meditation practice itself, as you're sitting, may be wonderful experiences and maybe not. More than likely it's kind of boring if you do a lot of it. But what it's doing is it's just like it's sharpening the witnessing part, because that's what you're doing. You're sitting down and you're going to witness whatever continues to move. Hold still and just observe. Thoughts come and go. Don't add, don't subtract, don't divide, don't do anything with them. The temperature of the room changes, the humidity changes, birds outside, as you know, doing that. Those kind of things by just watching and not adding anything to it. I'm not saying you can't hear a bird and think cardinal, or think something that adds on all by itself, because it's very simple, because the very thing that arises, the sound of the bird, and you're adding to it, is kind of a spontaneous acknowledgement of that isn't something you have to kind of think up. But if you add to it and then start to add on to the addition, the first thought about it seems to be pretty clear and not disturbing in the way that passion, aggression, ignorance can be. So that's why it takes practice to be able to relate to whatever is happening very directly, very genuinely and sincerely, without ulterior motives of getting ahead or really looking good or impressing anyone. More?
If we're having an intense emotion and somebody is asking about it,
Yes.
is there a way to not abandon anything in that situation?
I think there is. And there's no way to say exactly what that protocol might be ahead of time. But if you've been practicing just being with whatever's arising without jumping on board, without bailing, no pun intended, and without closing off. If you practice doing that, then when this more difficult situation comes up with someone in the situation you just described, because you're present, you will see the way. If the ego mind or the self-centered mind or the mind that is we're operating out of hope and fear, hope that things are going to get better, we're going to get what we want, and fear that everything's going to go south. If the mind is always doing that, then when we get in a situation that's a little challenging, then we kind of get aggressive or shut down or too elaborate. We start to elaborate on it or explain it too much or talk too much because we're concerned about what somebody thinks about what we're thinking, so on and so forth. But if you're just present, then amazingly, you hear what you're saying at the same time they do. You talk, and I don't mean impulsiveness, I mean spontaneity. Spontaneous means just being fundamentally present and harmonizing with everything. And it's not something you can kind of think up and do as a performance. There's some people that, maybe famous, popular people, that look like they're doing that, but they're just probably really good actors. They've gotten an idea how to do that, and they're probably Leos. Or they have a Leo moon. Not really. That's any sign of the zodiac can show off. Yes.
2 questions from Sheldon down in Union City.
I know that guy.
His first one, if we are just generally feeling flat and nothing seems to be arising for days, weeks, months, is that abandoning feelings?
It could be. The thing that I would recommend if someone is saying that to me, which sounds like you are, Sheldon, I would say, sit more. Because what's happening is over time, we actually train ourselves to seal that whole area off, and we can it's like a huge snowbank that never melts. And you need to bring, not to get too corny about it, but you need to bring some sunshine into that melts that snow. And that sunshine is only going to come from your wisdom mind. Get some help from other people, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, but you're going to have to do it. You have to sit down and actually generate some heat, generate some compassion, feeling with. So go into that shut down area and bring some light down into that. It takes time. It takes sincerity. It takes dedication. Not everybody's going to do this. Some people meditate a little bit, maybe try it out, see what it's like. But Sheldon, you should be sitting. I know he's in there. Just like I'm in that one up there. Yes.
His second question.
He's got 2 of them? Oh, go ahead.
If feelings arise, often apparently related to art or stories we see, our memories, is that being with feelings?
Well, it could be. Being with feelings is you're not adding on, you're not subtracting, you're not dividing, you're not doing anything with the feeling other than you just feel it. You may add on something like that feels good or that doesn't feel so good. So what the basic talk is about is abandoning feelings, which is what I'm endeavoring to point out is anytime you have any kind of emotional situation that comes up, I'm saying just feel it. And the way you do that is you might start out by seeing the way you keep trying to get away from it. I don't want to feel that way. I don't like feeling like this. When I'm around her, I start to feel this way. When I'm around him, this I feel, it's just endless, the various stories that we have about it. Excuse me. Further, yes.
Is resigning yourself to negativity abandoning in some way?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a form of ignorance. I'm just going to go along with it. I'm just tired of fighting this. I just go along with it. Don't do that. Don't go along with anything. And don't reject anything. And don't agree with anything. So it's like a big don't or a big donut, which probably would be a better way of saying it. Glazed donut. Yes?
What's the difference between that and having a willingness to feel negativity?
The difference between resigning yourself, because resigning yourself is just kind of a caving into it or giving up to it, which is ego. It's somebody there that is doing something about it. And what was the other part of that?
That or having willingness,
Willingness could have some ego situation, but it's not about getting rid of the ego. It's just being aware of that. So be aware that there's some kind of a protocol or some kind of agenda around that. I'm willing to do this. I'm just gonna go along with this. There's still a little elaboration on that sits on top of the feeling itself. The feeling itself, if you're just feeling, you won't have much to say. This doesn't mean that you wouldn't respond to someone about what's going on, depending on the person, the situation, what your history is with that person. There'd be so many things that would come into that situation. Yes?
Question from Terry in Hawaii.
That's a long ways away. Hi, Terry.
She says, for me, it seems like the less reference points there are to hold on to, the more painful the emotional eruptions can get, specifically in this moment.
Very good.
I don't really understand what is happening with my consciousness, but sometimes it feels very unsettling to not know and very alone. It's almost impossible to talk about. Thank you.
Very good, and thank you for that, what you're saying. It's not a question, but it's pretty good. It's a pretty good description of what you may have to deal with or go through in order to do this. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be, I guess I'll just feel stuff. Why didn't I think of that? I had to hear it from that old guy. But what she's saying there is the process. She's been a meditator for quite a while. She's spent time here. So she knows what it is to stretch your awareness. And it does feel lonely or alone. It can, especially if you're used to being constantly in a relationship dynamic that's somebody that you're with, you're not with, you like them and now you don't like them, and you're disagreeing with them, and you're having some kind of an ongoing dynamic that's goes in circles. But yes, it can show up as being Sometimes it's said someone who is on the path eventually, maybe not everyone, but gets into a situation where they're feeling very lonely because they're working on something, they don't know how to explain it to someone, or they might even realize that they really can't, and probably it's not a good idea to explain it to someone. They should just hang with it themselves. And that can feel lonely. But eventually, if you don't give up on it, it can just feel like you're alone, which is actually the case. We are alone. But if you're really alone, then you can really be with somebody else instead of being in some kind of a teeter-totter relationship. We all know what that is. Everybody here has been in something that goes this way, and then it goes the other way, and then it looks like it's going to get really good, and then the whole thing caves in the other direction. Yes?
What's the difference between being lonely and being alone?
Being lonely is there's someone there that is concerned about being by themselves and wants company, wants to be around someone else. Is, you could say, needy in that regard. They don't want to be alone. They want to be with somebody. Not wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it has to do with self-centeredness. Someone who is alone is someone whose loneliness has, you could say, translated into just being alone, is also someone who can be with everyone. Concepts will only take us so far there. So we used a couple. We've used lonely, or descriptions, and we've used alone. Alone doesn't mean I'm so alone. It's not a complaint. It's just the nature of who you are, what this is. We're all fundamentally alone. There's no way I can ever know how you feel or what you think, no matter how hard you try to explain. Even poets and songwriters try to communicate that to others, and they may communicate something, but they can't completely do that. It's still just a poem. It's still just a song. It's still just words. More? David?
What does space do to loneliness?
It's not separate from either one of them, but the aloneness doesn't separate itself from the space, whereas lonely doesn't want to have that much space. Wants to have things be more crowded. But if one just stays in that loneliness, then nothing lasts. So that loneliness feeling starts to break apart if you don't add on to it or try to rescue yourself from it. You can't, no one can talk about this unless you've been there, unless you really know what it to really have been lonely and understood how that changes. We have time for another question or two. Yes, sir.
Is a willingness to give up a habit a form of aggression by pushing it away?
Well, the willingness part is just being willing. That doesn't mean you're necessarily pushing on it. So I wouldn't push. I don't care what the habit is, unless it's something that if you don't stop it in 3 weeks you're going to be dead. That might be different. But a lot of the habitual things that are happening as far as chemicals or any kind of activity. The most important thing you can do, and of course I'm very biased about this. I've just spent close to half a century looking at my mind and talking to other people about their minds. So I'm rather biased. I'm saying you need to train your mind to see clearly, not to think clearly, to see, witness what is fundamentally here every moment. There's only this. There is past and future are a sham. I'm not saying there isn't a concept of that, and there isn't a physical form that is you that shows up in the kitchen in 20 minutes to wash dishes. Is that what you're going to do? So you can see what I'm saying. I'm not saying there isn't someone that'll go to the parking lot and drive away, that you guys will, go back to Grand Rapids. And so I'm not saying that isn't happening. It's just that then that also is now. This is always this. It's always this. It's never something else. Someone who is realized doesn't speculate too much on what's happening next. So, in other words, they don't balance their checkbook. They have their wife do it. Very good. Thank you so much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of your red chapbooks. I would also like to call your attention to the donation boxes that we have in the hallway. Please help us as you can financially if you treasure these teachings.
So that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-o-san shi-shi-hu. Shi-son-bu-sa-mo-ko-sa. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, its buildings, garden, and all adjoining areas from any and all dark or negative energy. Remove and dissolve any negative energy or devices. Fill everything and everyone with light. Please shield and protect with light our teachers, monks, students, and all practitioners of the Dharma, our families and friends from negative forces and energy from now on. Help us to realize the truth of the Buddha's teachings.